Okay, we are ready to go live
Fantastic.
and preserve ourselves for as long as the internet exists. Isn't that exciting?
Oh, very. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, good. Yes, so here we are. The what could have been the finale, but I followed your direction. I stopped at page 733, so it's not the finale.
I promise you, it would have been far too much to cover in this section and doing the book as a whole in one podcast, one episode.
It
We
could
would
have
have
been
gone for
this.
like an hour and a half or 2 hours. That would have been way too long for people. They
Maybe.
don't want to. They don't want to listen to us drone on that long.
Well, I don't know, but I like listening to myself talk. I like listening to you talk. I hope
I
people
mean,
want to listen.
listeners, we know you like us and we know you're following along, but to go 2 hours on a podcast, I just think it's excessive.
But that's why there's the pause button. It's see, this is where we're no longer watching things live on cable, but we get to pause for breaks, and breaks are marvelous things.
That is true, and there is the added feature of speeding up the podcast as well. You can go 1.25, you can go 1.5, you can go 1. I think 8 or something like that, 1.75. You can go really, 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 really fast.
Well,
And
that's yes, really fast.
I usually do that with a podcast I listen to.
Really? Huh?
Yeah, I go like 1.25 or 1.5.
I've never ever used that feature. I think I like the sound, the natural sound of people's voices, uh, and I figured that they put a lot of work into talking at their pace, and I want to preserve that.
That's totally fair.
Yeah. Anyway, here we are. So, welcome to the Word and Journey podcast, the late show edition, because it's late at night when it's being recorded. Therefore, it is forever, never, never late at night. Here we are, stories that shape us, make us think, keep us up way past our bedtimes. And second to last section of The Passage by Justin Cronin. Would you take care to briefly narrate this last section? And I know I'm springing that on you a little bit, but
Yeah, a little bit. Yep. So we had a lot of things that went down in these two
yeah,
sections.
one way we can think
We
about this. So I'm presuming to tell you how to do your job, even though you're quite good at your job. But there is the telling that is like the here's all of the detail, but then there could also be the more thematic telling of what was the story about, major themes, high points. Sometimes the more we can condense a narration reflects like a deeper communion with the story, a deeper understanding of it. So if you wanted to take a stab at that could
Well,
work too.
sure. I suppose the themes I'm just spitballing here, but could be transition and trust, uh, because when we last left them, Theo and Mausami were they had found basically they got left at a cabin. Well, they chose to stay, and they were transitioning into basically creating a little homestead for themselves and to bring in a baby into the world. So the other six left them there, and they traveled on, and then they got caught in a net. Turned out to be an army net, and they got taken to the what was it? First expeditionary base, and so they got to actually meet Greer and Voorhees and a bunch of guys that were there, these being Peter and Leisha and Amy and Hollis and Sarah and Michael. So Masami and Theo are at the cabin doing their thing, so they're transitioning, and then the trust piece is big because, we just got done at the Haven, where this group was entangled in all sorts of messes, because this Haven, the people there were, well, they were under the spell, I guess you could say, of Babcock, and to get caught in the net of these army men, probably force them to come to grips with, well, I guess we have to learn how to trust these people. And Alicia showed that she trusted them right away. And Peter didn't quite know why. But ultimately came out that, what do you call him? Colonel?
She was just the colonel.
He was just the colonel to her, all of her life. and actually to everybody else too. But apparently, he told her things that she never shared with anybody. Um, but, but mainly being that there was still a group out there that she could find one day and be part of. So she went right in. She shaved her head. She said goodbyes to them as life as she knew it, and she joined the first expeditionary. Started going out right away. Anyway, they short time in that base. They got to know some people. They only spent a few days there. There were some scouting missions and things that went awry because of they found a nest of virals. But back at the base, they're watching Dracula. They are meeting some folks and realizing, well, they have this operation down in Kerrville, Texas, that they're trying to get to. There's something in New Mexico, but really Texas is the main focus of where they're going to go next. So I say transition and trust would be the themes. There were a lot of moving parts in that section, and transition out of there. They left the base. Everybody left the base, and now they went to up the mountain. Peter and Amy stayed, and they actually went up and found who is still alive. Surprise!
Spoilers! Many spoilers, by the way. Yes.
Oh, I thought that was all for everything. Like,
Yeah,
we're
by now
just
it
we're
should
s-
be understood that we're spoiling things. So if you
we're
haven't read
spoiling
the
things.
book here, if you haven't read the book, well,
Yeah,
don't listen to the podcast.
yeah,
And then
yeah.
you should go read the
Just
book and then listen to us.
there you go. Exactly. Yes, Lacey, Sister Lacey,
Sister Lacey,
was alive this whole time.
the immortal life of Sister Lacey.
So we get quite a scene, or several scenes, with Peter and Amy and Lacey, and establishing how the heck that came to be. How is she still alive? Oh, by the way, she met and married Jonas Lear, the doctor who was pretty much responsible for the expedition
The
that
creator of the
exhumed
virals.
this
Yeah.
this virus in the first place. So
I
yeah,
was kind of glad to. I was kind of glad to hear from him, and I. It was his end was left really open in the very
I was
beginning,
really
so
glad to
it's
hear from him.
kind of cool to see him. He got to pop up and do something good with himself for a little bit. That was encouraging.
I totally agree. And so Lacey did not age very much or very quickly, yet obviously Dr. Lear did. So, he died, but he did a lot of really good things before he died. Um, Not the least of which is providing vials of Amy's blood that has a certain cocktail, you could say, of healing properties in it. So she gave that to Amy and Peter, who took hold of it. And I'm summarizing all of this really quickly. Um, the others were there. They went to this Lacey's cabin while Lacey, Peter, and Amy were in the bunker where all these things happened in the first place. She called Babcock to herself. Lacey did, while Amy and Peter went out to try to help Alicia and Hollis and so forth. And at the very end of the section, she set off a bomb that took out herself and Babcock. So once Babcock was dead, was gone, that left all of the many, if you will, the many from Babcock
Because of
also
course they go with him.
dying. Yep. So the very last thing that happened in the chapter was actually the baby came for Masami and Theo. But right after, I think it was the night of, right after the baby was born, Theo went to look for the dog, who he found dead, and he could tell that he was attacked. And then he went and he heard Masami scream, went to try to find her, went into the barn, and he got torn up. Theo did, by seemingly the viral. And the very last part of that section we just read is he told Masami to look away. He says, "I love you, look away." And that was pretty much what we read. I mean, there's of course a ton of more details I could get into, but that's the gist of it.
That's the gist. That's the main plot. There's yes, discovering new friends, new allies, new enemies, and the shifting alliances and separations, which is typical of any sort of character based ongoing ensemble cast drama. I mean, we saw this in Lost. We saw this in a lot of shows, but that's always a fun bit. Yeah, so thank you for that. That was excellently done. Some highlights that were coming out as we were doing this. So it was interesting. So comparing meeting the expeditionaries to meeting the Haven. When they came to the Haven, they were pretty much greeted with open arms, and yet the whole purpose of that place was essentially to offer them as human sacrifice. And then here's the inverse. Like their meeting is in this more aggressive, like they're caught in the net, caught in the trap, and yet their whole interaction here is really welcoming, really supportive, really they're really solid allies, and that's pretty clear, and never that relationship never seems to come under like a whole lot of strain. I mean, there's an interesting point of questioning is as Peter is trying to decide, is he going to stay with the expeditionary on their movements, or is he going to diverge away? But that's not a hostile conflict. It's more of just like Peter's having to decide. So it's an interesting inverse of the different meetings, I thought.
Definitely. That's good. I like that. It's a good way to look at that part.
The other, oh, sorry. One of my other favorite moments, I mean, you briefly mentioned it, but when all of the army guys are watching Dracula, like the original black and white Dracula, and at this point, I guess they don't have a lot of movies, so they're all like, melodramatizing it and all like talking along with it. And it's interesting. I thought it was just like a really sweet, touching sort of moment. But part of that was watching Peter watch the movie. I guess it's his first time ever encountering a movie, so he has no idea what it is, and so he's having to figure out what the medium is at the same time he's figuring out what the story is. And then you're watching him interact with it and the characters like really fresh, and it felt like it was a good bit of writing, like creating like what would it be like to first encounter a motion picture as an adult and then have to respond to that. It was a really interesting story, and it was really interesting seeing him caught up, and then of course,
especially in public with a bunch of other people too,
right? Who all know what it is. It's like stepping into someone else's ritual and being able to feel the gravity of it, and then but yeah, still having to like learn it as he goes. It was really interesting. A well written scene, I thought.
I like that a lot. I thought that scene was fun, really fun to read.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yes.
we learned a lot. We actually that piece of the story when he was talking to Voorhees and Greer, we get to learn a lot about what went down because they have because they have so many records and things that are written down from the past and how they even got to where they are. So yeah, it was really informative too. I mean, we found some of that in some of the other parts of like earlier, but it's really interesting to get to kind of relearn or relearn it with Peter from his perspective, and and Alicia and all them. So that part was really neat, I thought.
Yeah. Speaking of records, there was a lot. There was definitely a tone of like big reveal in this one, as so there you were discovering finally who was the colonel from way back early in the book. Alicia's relationship, that was kind of a twist. Discovering Sister Lacey was alive, obviously that was a twist. Sister Lacey though also had a lot of records from Jonas Lear and the creation of it. So one of the things she's able to show Peter was a record of who were the original 12. And we've heard their names before in Babcock's Stream of Consciousness, but now Sister Lacey is able to present, here's their first and last names, their ages, and their crimes. And this is what stands out to Peter as he's encountering it. And he's like, oh my gosh, they were criminals. Like the Virals are criminals, and violent ones too. They were accused of murder, of rape, of assaulting children, and a whole lot of things. So it came out and early on too. I mean, they were all from death row, so classically understood as like quote unquote the worst of the worst. Yeah, which is interesting, and I'll kind of slip into one of our first themes to touch on a little bit that I wanted to talk about was this idea of remnant, and the language I'm using is a little bit of reference to this theme that comes up in some biblical studies, like some surveys, especially through like Old Testament literature, they'll talk about this idea of remnant. Like there's always, out of the people that God has chosen, there's always somebody who makes it. Maybe it's just like a few, maybe it's just a family, maybe it's just like an individual, but there's always one that kind of slips through and survives and keeps the chain going.
The faithful remnant.
Faithful remnant, and it's something in the history of the Orthodox Church too. There's been that too. Part of our history is this unbroken line of what we call it the apostolic succession. Like all of our bishops can trace their spiritual lineage directly back to the apostles, and that's come under fire sometimes, and sometimes it's looked like the whole church is apostatizing, falling prey to some heresy. But then you get someone like St. Maximus the Confessor or St. Mark of Ephesus, like these lone figures who are like, wait a minute, this isn't the truth, this isn't the creed, come everybody come back. And they're usually persecuted for it, but then they save the church essentially. So there's this theme of remnant that shows up conspicuously in history, which is really fun. Where it's shown up here that got me a little bit excited is, so when they were creating the virals, they were experimenting, doing human sacrifice, human experiments on I guess who they would have seen to be like the lowlifes, the good for nothings, the the scum of society, the people on death row, which tag rant on like dehumanizing people based on things. But then there's Carter, Anthony Carter, who we got to know him at the beginning.
Yep.
And he's accused, he's convicted, but when you get to know his story, he's not actually guilty.
Yeah, I know.
He's not violent. He's not malicious. He doesn't have a criminal mind. He's just this guy who he's been hurt. He's been isolated. He's been dehumanized by people, and he's trying to make his way in the world. He gets caught up in someone else's drama, wrong place, wrong time. And you could argue, because he's black, he gets, this really vicious, conviction. But he gets wrapped up in this experiment. He becomes one of the 12. And it's Carter who turns Sister Lacey, and who saves her life essentially. And we could think that, okay, so here's all of these like criminals, violent, aggressive people, but then somehow divine providence, or Justin Cronin, saying, but let's get like a nice guy in there, like a not criminal into the criminals, and have him like preserve something, and kind of in a similar way that like Amy herself was kind of part of that remnant too, because she's, again, like we've talked about, she was just developed in a completely different way than Babcock or any of the others. And she was created through love, through affection, through attachment. And so now how we're seeing it play out is there's this remnant, there's this Carter, there's this Amy, who are able to stand against the tide of violence and devastation, which I just love. I love that idea and that motif of the remnant.
I like that too. And it was interesting when I thought about it, because Carter is the only one other than Babcock that we actually spend any time with. If you notice that, because I like that you brought up, all these records that Lacey showed Peter, and he read through them all and stuff. And what's interesting, as I was reading through those, I was noticing every detail of their record and what they did and everything. And I realized, oh, well, we've seen these names, but we haven't spent hardly any time with 10 of them. It's just Babcock and Carter, and of course Amy. But then you have the rest of them seemingly would probably have their own many, it seems like, if all those are following Babcock and doing his orders and all that good stuff. You have, Carter, who turns people but doesn't, rip them to shreds, at least a few of them. And then you have Babcock, who just turns everyone instantly evil by carrying out this vicious act of murder inside of a dream in order to get them to switch, right, to fully commit, if you will, to his vision of reality. So I just thought that was interesting. I was just reading all those names, like, oh, I don't really know too much about these other people.
Which I
So see,
feel like yeah, I feel like there should be a lesson if we're gonna, draw morals and applications out of this, is to think, okay, so behind every name, behind every viral face, there's a human story. And here's
yep.
where we as a people err if we ever forget that there is a whole human and a whole life and a whole history, and two parents, four grandparents, eight great grandparents and more who created this person. And so
Mhm.
again, to just say, oh, they're criminal, they're this murderer, they're a felon or whatever, is a gross injustice and hugely offensive. And be much better to venerate the image of God that is in people and remember there's a human here, and we need to get to know the whole human story, and also not do experimentation on live humans. That would be bad, bad, very
Well,
bad.
yeah. One of the best ways to uh, deepen relationship, I think, is a very simple way. It's 4 words: "Tell me your story." It is so simple, and yet seems like we have a hard time doing that, hard time stopping, taking that intentional time to let somebody else explain their experience. Tell me your story. I know you do this a lot, on a personal level, but definitely on a professional level. I
Oh,
mean, it's yeah, but it's not as common, right? It's just that. Like, when's the last time we sat down and we just said, "Hey, I'd love to hear your story." You have the next. It's like, "Hey, I have the next hour or two free, ready, go." It's just not as not as common of a thing. We just have a tendency to be so isolated and individualistic in our thinking and our living that those kind of things aren't readily at the forefront of our minds. So this that what you just said is absolutely true. Each one of those convicted murderers definitely have stories, and then obviously take it back several notches. People who do certain things that maybe offend or irritate or annoy or even hurt us, they have their stories, right? They have their reasons for doing things, even if they're um, I don't know, unaware of certain things that they've done against you. Like they have the stories.
mhm.
And so I don't know, we just have to be patient and intentional enough to stop and allow them to tell those
Mhm.
stories.
These are really strong themes the recovery work and the counseling work that I do, the recovery work in particular. In a recovery process, a lot of what happens in acting out is a total disconnect from others, a total disconnect from oneself. And so getting to know one's own inner life, getting to know one's own feelings and parts is a huge part of that. A huge part of the healing process. And a huge part of the healing process is also connecting with people. And so telling one story, there's different forms of it. There's the fearless moral inventory. There's the full disclosure. There's just like telling your life story, your timeline, a life confession. There's a lot of ways to bring out here's the fullness of me, and it tends to be it can be scary and painful, but it's a big healing moment. And but and it's good. It's good for us to get to know people in that way. And yeah, I mean, I've certainly discovered that in my own life as I have ventured to tell people about myself and to open up and to really prioritize the friends that will let me be open and be the fullness of all my different parts. Those relationships, they mean more. It means more to be known,
Hmm.
to know and be known. Is kind of the gold best of relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of stories, if I may slightly pivot here for a moment, one of the sections that stood out to me was when Peter was talking about when he was learning things from Voorhees, and he was remembering what his father had told him about his long treks, his long journeys, his long forays into the vast unknown, right? And he's like, on page 649, he said, Peter remembered the stories his father had told him, the stories of the ocean and the long beach, the rusting ribs of the great ships stretching as far as the eye could see. Never had he thought to wonder how this had come about. He had lived in a world without history, without cause, a world where things just were what they were. Talking to Voorhees and Greer was like looking at lines on a page and suddenly seeing words written there. So I really like that section, and it got me thinking, like, man, what would it be like for us to erase or edit or even misunderstand most of which, or even all of which that came before us, right? How does our understanding of history and the decades and the centuries leading up to our present moment, how does that inform how we approach our day-to-day living? You know, our relationships, our civil engagement, our education, our child bearing or child raising, our everything, right? How does that, because we were just talking about everyone has a story, right? So if you remove aspects of our history or even all of our history before, how does that impact how we do our day-to-day lives?
I think these are really good questions, and calls to mind again this question of why do we study history? Why do we need to tell our stories? And shameless, not so subtle plug. So if you, the listener, would care to go back and check out the episodes we did on 1984 by George Orwell, that was a huge theme through a lot of those episodes. Is that story world was one with no history, like a really rigidly enforced no history, and
And
what
constantly changing.
yeah, there is that variable also. When what we discovered, what we observed in that one is that people devoid of history are really easy to manipulate and really easy to control because there's nothing to latch onto. Uh, I'm thinking so that again, so in contrast to here in the Orthodox Church, the Orthodox tradition, we have a lot of history. We have like 2,000 years of history at least, or more if we factor in like the whole biblical timeline. And for me, so the church I was at before then, it was this really young little church plant, like 6 or 7 years old at the time that I left it, and it was really interesting. Actually, this came up for a brief moment. We were contemplating trying to do missions and had to go through the application process. And somewhere in there, it came there. There is this moment where one is supposed to like offer a pastoral reference to the mission organization, and it occurs to me like, hey, my pastors at the time, they don't actually really know me so well, but then I'm like, and these guys, they've only been pastors for a few years, and this church is only a few years old. Like, what kind of authority do they really have to make these spiritual pronouncements or determine like who's fit to go, preach the gospel or whatever, compared to like these, at least these like more established, which back then I thought, churches that were like, a few decades old, at least, a couple hundred years. So, so that was something that came up. And then, so yeah, but now stepping into this ancient tradition, for me, it feels really grounding. It feels really secure to not have to reinvent something all of the time, but to be able to fall into, this is a tradition, this is a liturgy, these are rituals, they are backed by 2,000 years and millions of people doing them, they've been shown to work,
Mhm.
and there's something super comforting there. And there's a way where I can say, I know my place here, I know my place and what to do and what's expected of me, which insert reference to Fiddler on the Roof there as well. Part of the value of history and of a tradition is yourself. And much as part of me loves the idea of like doing whatever I want, marrying whoever I want, picking whatever job, like having all of the options to choose, what I experience for myself and what I observe happens in other people is, faced with the choice of doing whatever we want, it's really overwhelming and it's stressful and it's not actually liberating, because there ends up being this sense of like, well, there's all of these things, I have to pick the best thing, but I don't know what the best thing is because nobody's going to tell me, because nobody knows. Like, nobody has reference to like history or tradition or anything bigger or anything that goes back beyond like a few minutes. So yeah, all that to say, we miss something when we don't have story.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think about how, um, I don't know how grounding it is for me to, when I'm thinking about like why I'm here, where I came from, all that stuff. How grounding that is. Like even taking it sphere by sphere. You know, if I want to get really broad with it, I'm a fan of history in all most regards. But if I want to get really broad with it, the history of the world, right? Let's take a bunch of places and people groups and nationalities and timelines and all sorts of things, and then boil it down to how did that happen? How did it, and then how did uh, you know the United States of America come to be, right? And so then now looking at the state's history, okay, now then what about Oregon? And then what about, I live in Wilsonville, so the history of Wilsonville, how did that come to be? And then kind of even boil it down closer to home, like where did my family history, right? Family of origin, my mom's side of things, my dad's side of things. And then I got married. So my wife's history, right? All of these kind of forming and formulating into this kind of coalescing, if you will, of shared history, intimate moments, great grand exploits, uh, like fortitude and steadfastness of so many people that came before me. If I think for a second that I got here just because I'm, you know,
Just because you're
the
so awesome.
just because I'm so awesome, like that's so shallow and prideful and small for me to think that way, right? And so that's why I think it's super, super important for us to realize the ground that was broken before us so that we could get to this stage of life where we are now, you know? So like absolutely what my great grandfather did in South Dakota, like that has a pull, that has an ultimate effect on how on what I do today, right? And like why I'm even sitting here in this room talking, uh, looking at the computer, talking on this microphone. Like it's not small potatoes. Like it's really meaty stuff and really integral for our growth as humans. I think to understand where
Mhm,
we came from. So to
mhm,
erase that, to edit that, manipulate that, it's problematic, and it really becomes an untethering that is that you can kind of become like one of those floaty guys at um, at car dealerships, just like kind of blown back and forth by the wind and get twisted all over and kind of look
yeah.
funky, kind of like Phil Dunphy shows us on Modern Family.
I'll have to trust you on that one, but yes, but floaty and untethered, which is not a sustainable way to live. It was certainly not a way to thrive.
Right.
And again, with the people that I work with, um, it it's been a theme over the last few months where I've had a lot of people talking about like not having a parent figure or not having elders. Like, never mind, like, not having ancient history, just, like, not having any old people in their life. Uh, so then when I ask, like, "Well, what's your vision for your life? Or where do you wanna go? How do you wanna be when you're old?" They're like, "I don't know. I don't know what that looks like." Or I've had some people that are like, I don't wanna think about getting old. I just pretend it's not gonna happen." I'm like, "I How do you live?" There's so much
I know, right?
denial. Yeah. So, which again, I mean, I count myself really fortunate to be both in an ancient tradition and also in like a really well-established parish, and also to have like old people. I mean, he reposed earlier this year, but our community elder, Father Andrew, he was like 96 when he reposed, and sharp as a tack, bright as the sun, like up until the end. So able to represent a lot of history. And when he came somewhere, he would bring the fullness of himself to every encounter. And you got the sense of like when you're with him, you're with somebody who's like ancient and full of life, full of wisdom, really holy, and it was a really beautiful thing. And so, now I'm like, oh yeah, I kind of have a vision for good, righteous old age, thanks to
Hmm.
him, and something to live for and to strive after. And um, I mean, thankfully, I'm going to have that from my biological ancestors also. But um, yeah,
And it gives new depth and new meaning to the proverb that says, a gray hair is a sign of honor, right? I mean, it's not just, "Oh, I'm getting old." No, I mean, it's like you right, I got some flex in the beard here. But, like, I mean,
Yep.
for real, it's, um, it's not I mean, it's not just a silly little phrase. I mean, there is something to that in terms of, having the life experience and going through hardships and trials and triumphs, that you're learning stuff as you go, and you are learning from older people so that then you can be the older person and teach the younger and invest in and pour into the people coming up behind you.
Yeah, I guess the variation is that, and I've heard some people talk about this, where once upon a time, like old age or gray hair really meant something that like, really meant that you'd like survive some stuff. Whereas these days, like it's kind of possible to like get old without actually doing anything or without being a useful person. Uh,
Hmm.
so there's
Just
not
existing.
right. So there's not anymore like a one-to-one correlation for wow, this person's like old and gray, they must be wise. It could be that
Hmm.
well, they're old and gray and they've been pampered, or they've managed to avoid things. Because so you have to be, I guess, discerning there too.
No, that's
But
a good point.
yeah, but yes, there do exist elders, and that's an important thing. Okay, I'm gonna shift because that's super fascinating, and I could get caught up in stories. I will say so. One, I guess, one last thing there. I had some conversations with someone once who was working through the the death of their father, and lots of things are going on. One of the things that he talked about was really loving with the siblings sharing stories about dad, or I get either they all had stories about dad, or he had told a lot of stories from his life, or maybe he hadn't or something. Okay, so my memory's fading, but the application I took away was like, yeah, telling my kids stories about me and my life and my childhood is important as part of that grounding process to know more, to know more of who I am, so as to know more of where they come from and what's impacted them. And I really wish I had more stories of my parents from when they were little. They
Hmm.
were rather sparse on that account with me. So I said I don't know a lot of anecdotes from my parents or grandparents, and I feel kind of sad about that.
I'll tell you, man. I think that's one of the what's been one of the my most favorite things in the past. To be honest about the timeline, let's say 5 to 7 years. I've been really well. I've tried to be really intentional about asking my parents questions and literally like asking them to tell me memories from when they're growing up. Um, it's been very impactful, honestly, because my dad had such a crazy story, um, and like a testimony, and everything. And my mom has a really good story, just how they met, and then their life together once they got married. Just different dynamics with them and their siblings, and my dad and stepdad, and all sorts of different things that factors that play into that. It's been really neat asking them to just tell me more stories, like how did you do this or why did you do that, and then going even back farther and saying, hey, do you remember anything about your parents that blah blah blah, and it's just really it's really good. I'm honestly toying with the idea of writing a huge family uh, biography.
I think that'd be a really great thing. I mean, I toyed around with a similar idea too. Just because, again, with this idea, like I want my kids to have history and to have heritage. And for me, thankfully, there's a spiritual heritage that's already handed to them, the lives of the saints, and that's a very big reality for them. But their biological ancestry too, like their relatives, Lolo June and Lola Jessie, who came over from the Philippines, and Papa Tony and Grandma Eleanor, who like met in Chicago and ended up in Southern California, and there's such a treasure in the stories, so we need to tell them.
Amen, man. Amen.
Mm-hmm. Um. Okay. Okay. Couple other fun themes. So we might have to be concise because I have a bedtime. So one other. So this was a thought that came up in getting to know the story of Sister Lacey, who has lived in her solitude for 100 years up in the mountain, and for some of that, it sounds like a roughly half of that, she had the companionship of Jonas Lear, but it was just them two. And so what I found interesting is comparing Sister Lacey's solitude versus what I'm interpreting as Theo and Masami's isolation. Um, they both represent people who they are set apart in a really really drastic way. Sister Lacey on the mountain, Theo and Masami on the farm, just them two and the baby. And so, just thinking about what is solitude and how to do solitude well. Um, I I I think of these things as different. Isolation we generally think of as not healthy. It's this absence of any relationship, being cut off, being separated. And we need relationships to thrive. We need to be connected with people. There is a space, though, for a healthy aloneness, which I think we usually use the term solitude to talk around that. And I feel like, and it comes up in contemplative traditions and in monastic work, some mindfulness work, to retreat into the inner world on your own. Something that makes solitude healthy, I think, is having a purpose for it, or having a structure, having a discipline, being able to really know what you're about. And
That
in this,
distinction was something I was going to say was it's purposeful.
yeah, Sister Lacey, she has a very clear purpose. She knows she's waiting for Amy to come back, and she knows she's waiting for whoever Amy's going to bring with her. And she's guarding the record. She's keeping herself well and alive, and she's cultivating a garden. And she's we can presume she's about her prayers because she was a nun, and that she never renounced that. So there's that. In contrast to Theo Masame, who they left the herd to be on their own. They, and granted, I mean, they fell back on the logistics because it would have been difficult for her to travel while pregnant. But even still, like they chose their aloneness when they had the option to be together, and they didn't necessarily have. Well, I guess they kind of had a purpose and a structure for it because they were going to have the baby. But because I don't know, I read it as the way that they left was kind of agreed upon, but not entirely like a conciliar decision. Like not everybody wanted them to leave. Peter didn't want them to leave, and it wasn't completely on good terms. And you kind of get the sense of, Theo Masami, they're kind of just like in their own little bubble anyway. Which, I mean, granted, I mean, their relationship was really covert to begin with. I mean, they conceived their child in an affair. So they were already like kind of in the shadows and in the secrets anyway. So I don't know. It just they seem like an interesting foil to each other, of someone who's doing solitude really well versus people who are choosing like healthy isolation just to kind of be caught up in each other. And I'd be curious to your thoughts.
Well, I do agree with the definitions that you put out, with solitude being healthy and isolation typically being unhealthy. I think I just saw more purpose in Masami's and Theo's decision than you did. I know it was painted as a sheer logistical decision, but I see it more as, I think they both wanted to like slow down, settle down, set up a home together, like where they, I don't know, probably never thought that they could have that. And here it was, they're out on their own. Theo's alive, thank God. And then they are going to have this baby together, which I don't know. I just saw it as, I felt like there was more purpose in that. And, Theo as a, taking care of her and taking care of all the house stuff. And as she's going through pregnancy, and I don't know, I can see that they left the group. So they like distanced themselves from Peter and so forth. But I did, yeah, I just saw more purpose in it, I guess.
You can make that argument, and I mean, it's a good one. So I hear you. Yeah. Yeah. So
And then I think Lacey's was just kind of eventually forced solitude. Like she made the best of it, but I mean, she's not going to find anybody else out there after Dr. Lear dies. So,
yeah. I suppose
yeah.
one of the things I'm thinking is that when you get the Omasami, their purpose only extends as far as their own selves creating a home for the baby. Hopefully that becomes their legacy. Whereas, Sister Lacey, who doesn't have any relatives anymore, she has, her concern is much bigger than just herself. It encompasses Amy. It encompasses like, when she invokes like the story of Noah and like the preservation of the human race. So like her purpose is really far reaching. And I don't know, I guess something about that for me, like it read a little bit differently. Like yeah, it's kind of
It
forcing her,
is.
but
It is definitely farther reaching, but she also has the benefit of having that foresight. She has that vision, and the gifts to go with it, to be able to communicate to the others and the many and Amy and everything from long distance. So it's like she's kind of, I guess, a little bit more well off in that regard, whereas Masami and Theo just had their what was right in front of them to figure out, and that being, well, she's pregnant, so how are we going to survive the trek up to Colorado?
yeah.
And in a way, they were kind of looking ahead too. Hopefully, they were thinking, well, this is our son or daughter who could carry on our name, and hopefully he or she lives a long, long time and can make a family of their own. You know what I mean? So maybe that was a thought of theirs too. Like, hey, we're going to bring new life into this world. So maybe they're looking beyond themselves as well.
Maybe so. It's it's a good perspective. I see where you're coming from, and there's weight there for sure. So you, the listener, you be the judge. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think of this. But that would
Yeah,
be fun. Yes.
yeah. I'm actually curious about that too. I don't know
Yeah.
how much interaction we're going to get, like comments and whatnot. But it'd be awesome to hear from anybody who's following along with us on what
Hmm.
your thoughts on that
Hmm.
situation is.
Yeah. I hope we have followers too, because that would make me just feel so nice. Anyway.
It'd be awesome.
Yeah. Um. Okay. So maybe one other thematic point to think about, and then my bedtime calls to me. But I want to talk a little bit about the power of naming. uh
Do you want to do you mind if I, because this part you're talking about is way better than what I'm going to talk about. Can I slip something in real quick before we get
okay,
there?
okay, sure.
So I was interested in the reversal of a lot of vampire tropes
Oh, yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
Justin Cronin put in here,
That was interesting.
because we find out as we're watching Dracula, the classic Dracula's scenes and movies and stuff. It's, all vampires, they can't see their reflection, right? And that's why you hold up a mirror to them, they can't see anything, so that's why they freak out and die or whatever, I don't know, that whatever. But that is so different than when we see that our smokes, our vamps, they're coming after Peter holds up the, I think, a frying pan or something like that, and the vampire sees its reflection and was horrified. Like, he said, I think he even made a weird noise, like, "Whoa, whoa, what's that?" So they can see their reflection, and they're repulsed by their own image. So I thought that was an interesting reversal. Um, Other classic vampire tropes are that garlic is their, kryptonite, right? You just get up garlic in a whatever. And it was interesting here with in this novel, they use garlic to entice or to lure them to the traps. Greer and his men put out traps and they put garlic up in the trees. So I thought that was funny, kind of like reversing that as well. And then one more is like, driving a stake through the heart kills a vampire. That's kind of a classic vampire trope. Well, with these creatures, there's no way you can get close enough to stab one. But then I wrote that note, and then right after that, we read where Michael gets out his dagger and actually manages to stab one when it's launching at him.
I
And
was
so
so
I'm like,
proud of
dang it,
him
I
at
guess
that
that.
moment.
Oh, it's so proud. That was
Yeah.
awesome. That was such a badass moment. I'm like, "Yo, Michael, that's amazing."
Mhm.
So, like, and then he was kind of like twitching and stuff, and Amy finished him off. But that I was just thought interesting how in some way or another Cronin seems to be able to reverse all of the little tropes that we're so used to seeing in vampires.
Yeah. It's fun. It's a fun writing technique to kind of turn something on its head, or to kind of play with, here's a trope, or here's an expectation, and here's a way that thwarts it, but not in a way that disrupts the whole thing. Like, they're very clearly still vampires of a
Yep.
sort, and we're very much in that mode, and they're but they're different. It's a kind of a fresh take without abandoning the whole thing, which is
Mhm.
nice.
Yep.
And yeah, I must say that whole scene was really fun. It was yeah, it was cool to see, Michael I've been enjoyed his arc a lot. He seems like he's come quite a way from like being just like kind of like insecure and up in his head to like now he's like this like super warrior mechanic, and like paired with Amy too, who's this like quiet mystical little sage who like she's just up there with her guns being Rambo like all of the others. I don't know. There was that was kind of fun. So
Yeah,
funny.
totally. I actually really we haven't talked about Michael much on here. It's interesting because I see him growing so much. See how he ingratiated himself with the people, even in the Haven, where they trusted him to get the Humvees going, and then now with the military men too. Getting the nickname Lugnut and all that stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and really growing. Like he knows what he's good at, obviously, but he's
Mm-hmm.
taking these responsibilities with a lot more maturity, much more
Mm-hmm.
gravitas, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
he's taking kind of to the next level, right? And now he
Mm-hmm.
gets to actually stake a or stab
Mm-hmm.
a smoke. I mean, it's
Yeah,
really interesting. I like his arc.
his is a fun arc. It's interesting seeing. Um, and we're not going to fully get into the archetypes conversation, but framing everyone as like what is their superpower? Michael's the mechanic, Sarah's the healer, Alicia's a warrior, Peter's like the visionary, that sort of thing. And there's just different developments available for them. Like someone like Alicia, she lives by the sword, she dies by the sword, and there's kind of only so many places that violence could go while still being violent. I mean, that sort of character could change to become a healer, become more gentle, become more connective. Her character doesn't really like she doesn't become more open and more trusting and more vulnerable. And in a sense, like I don't know, like I mean, when she died, like I wasn't actually that too bummed. I was more sad for like Peter who had to like do the deed because she was getting turned. Just because like I don't know, I didn't feel like
That was a pretty big moment, though.
it was a big moment, but I don't know, like her character yeah, like she peaked when she shaved her head and was and landed with the soldiers because that was like kind of always who she were, where she was going. And so there was like and Peter kind of had the sense of her too. There wasn't anything really to discover in her after that. Whereas someone like Michael, who yeah, he's this very like techie mechanic sort of person. Now he's learning how to make friends and be social and be a warrior and be a traveler and all of these things. Like his character is just getting a lot more complex. And Sarah, she's like this like kind of mopey, lovesick, healer, kind of like homebody sort of person who now is also becoming like a traveler, a warrior, learning to fall in love all over again. And so there, yeah, so yeah, there's some fun character development, which
Hmm.
has been fun.
Definitely.
Yes.
All right. Sorry, I
So
just want to implement that little
yeah,
thing there before you went on with the names. I think this is
it's
really good.
good. Yeah, vampires are good. I have my own vampire twist a little bit in my novels too.
Ooh, ooh.
So
Okay,
for
okay.
another time we'll come back to that teaser.
Nice.
Anyway, so one of the most powerful moments in this section. So again, Sister Lacey takes out Babcock. That felt like a good win, good death for both of them. Uh, and and following that, if we're reading it right, so when Babcock dies, then his many will also die as well, because I guess they're connected to him in some way. Um, which I suppose if you take out the other 12, maybe the rest of them go too. Huh, that'll be an interesting discovery.
Hmm.
Anyway, but what's been built up is that Amy, who is like the 12, but not the 12, she's the other. She's had this communion with them all along. She's been this voice, this presence, and aware of them. And it comes out that one of the things, one of her functions, Sister Lacey compared her to the Ark in the story of Noah's Ark. I guess part of what she's been holding is their names, their stories, their identities, at least their names. And so after Babcock's demise, all of these virals, the many, they're wondering, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? And she's able to tell them. And there's several paragraphs of just like name after name after name after name as she's telling them who they are. And this is definitely a trope that shows up in a lot of literature. Of the true name of something, you can control it. There's a way to, even in like real life psychology counseling, to call a thing by its right name. is really powerful, and it's a way of really connecting with something. And so I was really struck by how she's able to give them their names back, and in so doing, to kind of heal them, to release them, to let them be at peace. They
Mm-hmm.
Up till now, they've been stuck in Babcock's dream and carrying his name. But in naming
Yep.
them something different, she allows them to be their true selves again, which is not
Mm-hmm.
the Babcock, not the many. And in a sense, like not even a viral. I guess that's a debatable point amongst the characters. Like, are the virals still human a little bit? Uh, in this case, it seems like there is a little bit of their humanity left in them, at
Mm-hmm.
least enough to recognize their real selves before they die, which I thought was really beautiful. And
Yeah.
and again, bringing in this idea of how do we name ourselves? How do we call ourselves? How do we name and call others? Um, I know you and I have both talked about the intentionality with which we've named our sons, and all that goes into that. Um, and I think we could maybe even like push that further, like to not just be like, this is Nicholas, this is Isaac, this is but like this is my son, the future priest, this is my son, the future monk, this is my son, the future healer, or
Mm-hmm.
something, and begin to speak some vision into them. There's a lot of power in that.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I like that. I was really captivated by. I mean, did I read every single name that she spoke to them? No, but I
I
saw
did.
all the names. Did you really?
I did.
I did not. I did not read every name. I will readily admit that I didn't. But I saw there's quite a. I mean, I don't know. She did 3 or 4 paragraphs of a whole. Yeah, 4 paragraphs, a whole bunch of names. Um, but anyway, I think it was really an incredible, powerful moment as well, and I really like that. That she broke it down. Well, there's a paragraph between names. It said Amy felt their sorrow, but it was different now. It was a holy soaring. 1,000 recollected lives were passing through her. 1,000 stories. There's stories again of love and work, of parents and children, of duty and joy and grief. Beds slept in, meals eaten, bliss, pain of the body. A view of summer leaves from a window on a morning it had rained, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it really pinpoints these specific stories and these memories. And so I don't know if these all flooded through her right then or if she already contained those. I guess that's neither here nor there, but it's just really awesome how she she saw those as it kind of flowed through her, but at the same time she was giving so much to them too. She was giving this new, like, a realization, right? A fresh revelation, if you will. You are this person, you are this person, you are this person. This is your name. And so hopefully those same stories that were coursing through her, she could redirect right back into them. So they remember, boom, okay, not only in my name, but my whole story, my whole journey, my life, all these things that happened before I was this viral, I was this way. So I think it was a really
Yeah.
huge, huge moment.
Because again, like we were talking history and story, when you know your story, you know who you are. You know where you've come from, you know what's expected of you, you can know where you're going. You take that away, you're just free floating. And
Hmm.
uh yeah, and it's a passive approach to life. And when you
Hmm.
are passive in that way, you're subject to being controlled by whoever, whatever would like to control you. And believe me, there are lots of forces that would like to control you. So best to be active with yourself and know your story, tell your story, know your name.
Absolutely. Don't strive for complete free will or total autonomy. It does not end well. It ends in chaos, and it's actually not even real. So
Yeah,
there you go.
yeah, it's not so fun. It's like my oldest son, he's at the age now where he can like kind of he has this perception of dad and mom that they get to do whatever they want because they're grown-ups. And I'm like, oh son, if only you knew how little I actually get to do that I want to do. Granted, I I carve out some time to do what I want to do, but comparatively, it's not very much. And it's very costly when I do it. So sorry, kid.
Yep.
Anyway.
Well, that's our idealistic selves when we're younger, right?
Yeah,
Those are
yeah,
the dreamers.
yeah. Oh, those dreams. I love my kids. Anyway, that, I think, is the essence of this section of the passage. Lots about stories and names and identities, and hopefully seeing the human in the vampire. And we should eat garlic. It is medicinal and it is good for us. So
Oh man! But what I really love about that is like we weaved all these, or he, Josh Cronin, weaved all these massive themes and thoughts and everything into this moment, but still a ton happened. Like the plot drove forward at a very rapid pace. Yet we find all these character moments. We find all of these um, things that people are still wondering and stressing about, struggling with, and it's really all these deeply human moments, even when we're talking about Amy, who's only like half human, I mean, it's just like, it's just such an amazing couple sections, I thought. But it's kind of representative, I think, of the whole book. But we will get
yeah,
to that next time because we're gonna
yes,
finish the book.
we're actually gonna finish this beast finally. So yes, so get ready for fireworks and a party, and we will yes, we'll finish the book. So if you're following along, there's not very much left. We maybe could have crammed it in tonight, but we're gonna give you one more whole episode, so you'll thank us.
You will, and we'll be able to talk about the whole book again and recap everything, talk about all the characters, everything that happened, and maybe even preview the next book in the series. We'll see.
We will see. In the meantime, it's been great doing this with you, dear listener. These sort of things don't just happen out of nowhere. It takes time and money to do this. So if you are interested in the work that we do in bringing you really good stories, please visit my Patreon, patreon.com/MosesBarnaby, and sign up to be part of our community. And there will be prizes, and I'm hoping to release a short novella soon, so there will be that as well. And please give me some money so I can pay my cover artist. So anyway,
Come on, people, support this man. It's
yes,
well
please.
worth it.
Thank you.
5, 10, 15, $100 a month, whatever you can do.
Or at least listen and like and review and rate and review the podcast, because we all
Absolutely.
know that is very helpful as well.
And
Anyway,
listen to it in double time so you can get more done.
I already talk fast enough, so I will
Yeah, I
be
know.
indecipherable.
It's fair.
Anyway, cool. Well, thank you, Justin, for being here. And I will see you again very soon for the conclusion of this wonderful vampiric epic, The Passage.
My pleasure. And I'm looking forward to it. All right, y'all. Have a good one.
Good night.
Bye.